In the remote Arkansas mountains of 1874, where ancient oaks grow so thick they swallow sunlight whole, there existed a crossing that every traveler feared. Buffalo City sat like a forgotten prayer among these Ozark peaks, where winter fog could hide secrets for months. The story I'm about to tell you begins with two brothers who became legends for their kindness. Cassius and Morai Grimwald, trusted guides who never let a woman cross those treacherous mountain passes alone. But in their isolated hollow, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, these helpful brothers were conducting experiments that would horrify even the most hardened investigators. What Deputy Marshal Blackwood discovered in their attic defied every notion of human decency. How did 16 women vanish without a trace? What drove two respected community members to such unthinkable acts? And what evidence finally exposed the truth that authorities tried to bury for decades? Prepare yourself for what's coming next, because this is something that will leave you in absolute shock. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're brave enough for this journey. Subscribe so you don't miss stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. The February wind of 1874 cut through Buffalo City, Arkansas, like a blade through bone, carrying with it whispers of missing women and the kind of silence that settles over communities when evil walks among them undetected. Deputy U.S. Marshal Theodore Blackwood arrived at the Newton County Sheriff's office on the morning of February 15th, his breath-forming clouds in the frigid air as he tied his horse to the weathered hitching post outside the single-story building that served as the region's law enforcement headquarters. Sheriff Josiah Crenshaw barely looked up from his desk when Blackwood entered, shuffling through a stack of incident reports with the casual disinterest of a man who had grown comfortable dismissing the concerns of desperate families. The federal marshal had traveled 3 days through treacherous mountain passes to investigate reports that 3 separate families had filed missing person cases within the span of 2 months, each describing daughters or wives who had vanished while attempting to cross the Buffalo River Valley into the Western Territories. Blackwood's military training during the Civil War had taught him to recognize patterns that local officials often missed, and the systematic nature of these disappearances immediately triggered his investigative instincts. Sarah McKinnon, age 26, had disappeared on December 20th while traveling to join her husband in Fort Smith. Margaret Collins, 23, vanished January 8th en route to a teaching position in Van Buren. Elizabeth Cromwell, 19, went missing February 2nd with her entire family's wagon train, though strangely, only the women had disappeared, while the men were found dead from apparent accidents. Crenshaw waved dismissively at the reports when Blackwood pressed for details, explaining that mountain travel was inherently dangerous and that women frequently took up with other folks or simply got lost in the maze of valleys and ridges that defined the Arkansas wilderness. The sheriff's cavalier attitude toward missing persons cases would later be documented in federal reports as a contributing factor that allowed the crimes to continue undetected for months. What caught Blackwood's attention in the incident reports was a recurring detail that Crenshaw had apparently overlooked entirely. In each case, family members specifically mentioned that the missing women had accepted assistance from helpful local guides who volunteered to escort them through the most dangerous sections of the mountain crossing. The Grimwald brothers, Cassius and Morai, were mentioned by name in all 3 reports as the last people seen with the vanished travelers. Store owner Elias Pike confirmed these details when Blackwood interviewed him later that afternoon at Pike's General Store, the primary supply point for travelers heading into the Ozark interior. Pike's meticulous record-keeping, a habit developed during his previous work with railroad companies, revealed a disturbing pattern of purchases that should have raised immediate suspicions. The Grimwald brothers had been buying unusual quantities of rope, chains, women's undergarments in various sizes, laudanum and chloroform over the past 6 months, despite having no apparent legitimate use for such items. Pike explained that the brothers had built their reputation over the past 9 years as the most reliable guides in the region, never charging fees for their services, and always insisting on personally escorting lone women travelers. For their protection, their intimate knowledge of hidden trails, seasonal flooding patterns, and dangerous river crossings made them invaluable to travelers unfamiliar with the treacherous terrain. The brothers' home sat strategically positioned at the only reliable river crossing for 50 miles, making it virtually impossible for westward travelers to avoid contact with them. The federal marshals' trained eye immediately recognized the tactical advantage this positioning provided for anyone with predatory intentions. Blackwood's investigation notes, preserved in federal archives, document his growing suspicion that the brothers' helpful reputation was actually a carefully constructed hunting strategy designed to identify and isolate vulnerable victims. Local midwife Sarah Cogburn provided the most disturbing testimony when Blackwood interviewed her that evening at her modest cabin overlooking the valley. Cogburn had delivered over 300 babies during her 24 years of practice and possessed extensive knowledge of normal and abnormal medical practices, making her uniquely qualified to recognize something deeply wrong with the Grimwald family's interest in women's health issues. She described multiple encounters over the past year where Cassius Grimwald had approached her with inappropriate questions about female anatomy, monthly cycles, and breeding potential, claiming his father needed the information for legitimate medical research. Her professional journal contained dated entries documenting these conversations that correlated perfectly with the timeline of disappearances. The midwife's most chilling revelation concerned the brothers' systematic approach to gathering information about potential victims. They consistently asked about women's ages, marital status, family connections, and travel plans, information that would be invaluable for someone selecting victims, unlikely to be immediately missed. Cogburn's testimony would later prove crucial in establishing premeditation and planning during the brothers' trial. As darkness settled over the Arkansas mountains on February 15th, Blackwood made the decision to personally investigate the Grimwald property. His military instincts told him that time was critical, and the systematic nature of the disappearances suggested that more women might currently be in danger. The federal marshal could not have imagined that his investigation would soon uncover evidence of crime so systematic and brutal that even experienced lawmen would struggle to document them without breaking down completely. The morning of February 16th would bring the first concrete evidence of violence when Blackwood discovered a woman's brass button embedded deep in the bark of an oak tree near the river crossing, positioned at exactly the height where a struggling victim's clothing might catch. During a violent struggle, the brass button embedded in the oak bark told Deputy Marshal Blackwood everything he needed to know about the violent struggle that had occurred at the river crossing, but it was only the beginning. Federal case file number 1874-287 documents how Blackwood spent the morning of February 17th interviewing every merchant, tradesman, and resident within a 20-mile radius of the brothers' property, building a comprehensive profile of their activities and purchasing patterns that revealed the calculated preparation behind their crimes. Elias Pike's detailed purchase receipts, preserved in the Arkansas State Archives, painted a disturbing picture of systematic acquisition that no legitimate family would require. Between August 1873 and February 1874, the brothers had purchased 47 yards of rope, 16 sets of iron shackles intended for livestock restraint, 23 bottles of laudanum from traveling medicine shows, and most troubling of all, women's undergarments, in sizes ranging from small to extra large, including intimate items that would only be necessary if the brothers were clothing multiple women simultaneously. Pike's testimony revealed that Morai Grimwald had specifically requested binding materials that won't leave permanent marks and had inquired about the strongest varieties of rope available for medical restraint purposes. The store owner's meticulous bookkeeping showed that these purchases always occurred immediately after reports of missing travelers, creating a timeline that would later prove crucial during prosecution. Sarah Cogburn provided even more damning evidence when Blackwood conducted a second, more detailed interview at her cabin on the evening of February 17th. The midwife's personal journal contained entries dating back 18 months describing increasingly disturbing conversations with Cassius Grimwald about female reproductive cycles and anatomy. Her written testimony documented how Cassius had asked detailed questions about determining a woman's fertility based on physical examination, timing of menstrual cycles, and optimal breeding conditions. Most chilling of all were Cogburn's notes about Cassius discussing his father's research into improving human reproduction. through systematic study and documentation. The midwife had initially assumed these conversations related to legitimate medical practice, but her growing discomfort led her to document each interaction with dates, times, and direct quotations that would later serve as crucial evidence of premeditation. Cogburn's testimony revealed that Cassius had specifically asked about methods for keeping women calm and compliant during extended medical examinations, requesting detailed information about dosages of laudanum and other sedatives that could render patients unconscious but not fatally. Her professional knowledge allowed her to recognize that these inquiries had nothing to do with legitimate medical practice and everything to do with facilitating systematic abuse. Local blacksmith Thomas Brennan provided additional evidence that further established the brothers' preparation for long-term captivity when Blackwood interviewed him on February 18th. Brennan's workshop records showed that Marai Grimwald had commissioned custom metalwork, including reinforced door locks, window bars designed to prevent escape from inside buildings, and specialized restraint systems that he claimed were needed for managing livestock. During medical procedures, the blacksmith's detailed drawings of the commissioned items, preserved in court evidence files, revealed sophisticated restraint systems far beyond anything needed for legitimate purposes. Brennan testified that Marai had requested modifications to ensure the restraints would hold securely for extended periods while preventing permanent injury to the restrained individual's specifications that made perfect sense only in the context of long-term human captivity. Brennan's most disturbing revelation concerned Marai's specific instructions about noise suppression, requesting soundproofing, materials and advice about construction techniques that would prevent sounds from carrying beyond the immediate vicinity of a building. The blacksmith had assumed these requests related to workshop noise concerns, but federal investigators later determined they were clearly intended to muffle screams and cries for help from captive victims. Local seamstress Martha Henley provided the final piece of evidence that convinced Blackwood to seek federal search warrants for the Grimwald property. Henley's sewing records showed that Cassius Grimwald had brought her multiple items of women's clothing for repairs and alterations over the past 6 months, including dresses, undergarments, and accessories that belonged to different women and showed clear signs of violent removal. Henley's testimony described clothing items with torn fabric, missing buttons, and bloodstains that Cassius claimed resulted from wilderness accidents suffered by women his father was treating for injuries. The seamstress had preserved fabric samples and detailed notes about the damage patterns, evidence that federal investigators later matched to missing persons reports and victim descriptions provided by surviving family members. Most significant of all was Henley's description of Cassius's specific requests for alterations that would make the clothing easier to remove quickly, including the addition of tear-away closures and the removal of complex fastening systems. These modifications served no legitimate purpose, but would facilitate rapid access during systematic assault, establishing clear evidence of premeditation and planning that would prove crucial during prosecution. As Blackwood compiled this evidence on February 18th, he discovered fresh wagon tracks leading directly from the main trail to the Grimwald property, tracks that appeared to have been made within the past 48 hours. The depth and pattern of the wheel impressions suggested a heavy load, possibly including human passengers, indicating that the brothers might currently be holding additional victims who were still alive and could potentially be rescued if federal authorities acted immediately. The convergence of witness testimony, physical evidence, and circumstantial indicators convinced Blackwood that the Grimwald brothers were operating a systematic kidnapping and assault operation that had been active for at least 18 months and potentially much longer. Federal case files document his decision to request immediate search warrants and federal backup, recognizing that time was critical if any victims were to be saved alive. The federal search warrant arrived by emergency courier on February 19, 1874, bearing the official seal of the United States District Court for the Western District of Arkansas and authorizing Deputy Marshal Blackwood to search the Grimwald property for evidence of kidnapping, assault, and potential murder. Court records preserve the warrant's unusually broad language, reflecting federal prosecutors' understanding that the crimes being investigated extended far beyond simple assault and likely involved systematic captivity and torture of multiple victims over an extended period. Blackwood approached the Grimwald homestead at dawn on February 20th, accompanied by 2 additional federal deputies and local physician, Dr. William Hartwell, whose medical expertise would be crucial for documenting physical evidence and treating any survivors they might discover. The property itself occupied a strategic position overlooking the Buffalo River crossing, with the main cabin constructed to provide clear sight lines in all directions while remaining hidden from casual travelers by dense stands of ancient oak and hickory trees. The brothers emerged from their cabin with suspicious calm when Blackwood announced his federal authority and presented the search warrant, displaying none of the shock or outrage that innocent men would naturally exhibit when confronted with accusations of kidnapping and murder. Cassius Grimwald's soft-spoken politeness and Morai's mechanical compliance with the deputy's instructions created an atmosphere of wrongness that experienced lawmen recognized as the behavioral signature of individuals hiding monstrous secrets. Inside the cabin's main room, federal investigators discovered the first concrete evidence of the brothers' systematic crimes in the form of detailed journals and medical records that documented their father's twisted research methodology. Jeremiah Grimwald's leather-bound notebooks, preserved in federal evidence archives, contained over 200 pages of meticulous observations about female anatomy, reproductive cycles, and systematic procedures, designed to study what he termed breeding optimization through controlled environmental conditions. The father's handwriting revealed a methodical mind consumed with pseudoscientific theories about improving human reproduction through isolation and systematic study, documenting conversations with his sons about specimen collection protocols and examination schedules that treated kidnapped women as laboratory subjects rather than human beings. His entries included detailed floor plans showing modifications to the cabin's attic space, specifically designed to house multiple subjects for extended periods while preventing escape or communication with the outside world. Most damning of all was Jeremiah's deathbed confession letter, written in trembling script during his final illness in December 1873 and hidden beneath floorboards in his personal chest. The confession, admitted as evidence during the subsequent trial, detailed the entire scope of the operation, including the names of all 16 victims, dates of their capture, and descriptions of the systematic abuse they endured in service of his research into human breeding optimization. The confession revealed Jeremiah's belief that the isolated mountain hollow provided the perfect laboratory for conducting pure scientific research without interference from authorities who failed to understand his revolutionary contributions to medical knowledge. His writing displayed a complete absence of remorse or recognition that his actions constituted crimes, instead expressing pride in the sophisticated methodology he had developed and frustration that his deteriorating health prevented him from completing his studies. Federal investigators discovered Jeremiah's modified medical instruments in a locked cabinet adjacent to his sleeping area, including surgical tools, altered specifically for conducting examinations on restrained subjects and devices designed to inflict pain while minimizing permanent damage. Dr. Hartwell's examination of these instruments, documented in federal medical reports, confirmed they had been used recently and showed clear signs of systematic cleaning and maintenance. The attic space revealed the full horror of the Grimwald operation when deputies climbed the reinforced ladder that Morai had constructed to access the modified upper level. The space had been divided into multiple chambers using heavy timber partitions, each equipped with restraint systems anchored directly into the structural beams and ventilation systems designed to keep occupants alive during extended captivity. Physical evidence throughout the attic included personal belongings from missing travelers carefully organized and labeled according to Jeremiah's documentation system, creating a macabre museum of his victims' identities and possessions. Clothing items, jewelry, personal letters, and travel documents were sorted by victim and date of capture, demonstrating the methodical approach the brothers had taken to erasing their victims' identities while preserving trophies of their crimes. The discovery that would haunt investigators for decades was found in Morai's personal workshop area, adjacent to the main attic space. Detailed construction drawings showed plans for expanding the operation to include specialized chambers, designed for housing children, complete with restraint systems, sized for smaller bodies and feeding mechanisms that would allow long-term captivity of juvenile victims. These expansion plans, coupled with correspondence found in Cassius's personal effects, discussing the identification and selection of families with young daughters, revealed that the brothers viewed their current operation as merely the initial phase of a much larger, systematic kidnapping enterprise. Their discussions about breeding programs and generational research demonstrated intentions that extended far beyond individual assault to encompass the systematic enslavement of entire family lines. As federal deputies continued their systematic search of the property on the afternoon of February 20th, the sound that would change everything echoed from the reinforced attic space above. Faint voices, weakened by months of captivity but unmistakably human, called out desperately when they heard unfamiliar footsteps and voices discussing the rescue operation. 12 women, some barely alive after months of systematic abuse, had somehow survived Jeremiah Grimwald's research program and were still imprisoned in the chambers that had served as their hell for periods, ranging from weeks to nearly 8 months. The voices echoing from the reinforced attic space sent federal deputies into immediate action on the afternoon of February 20th, 1874, as Deputy Marshal Blackwood coordinated the most complex rescue operation ever attempted in Arkansas Territory. Dr. William Hartwell's medical training proved crucial as the first survivor was carefully extracted from her restraints, revealing the systematic nature of injuries inflicted over months of captivity and the urgent need for specialized medical care that would determine whether these women lived or died. Margaret Holloway, the 23-year-old teacher who had disappeared in March, was the first victim reached by rescue teams. Her educated voice guided deputies through the maze of modified chambers to locate other survivors, trapped in the hellish prison that Morai Grimwald had constructed, with meticulous attention to preventing escape. Her detailed account, recorded by federal stenographers within hours of rescue, provided the first comprehensive testimony about the brothers' systematic methodology and their father's role in orchestrating the entire operation. Federal Medical Examiner reports preserved in case file 1874-27 documented 12 survivors in various states of malnutrition, physical trauma, and psychological damage that would require months of specialized treatment to address. Elizabeth Cromwell, the 19-year-old who had endured nearly 8 months of captivity, weighed barely 80 pounds when rescued and showed evidence of systematic torture designed to break her spirit while keeping her alive for continued abuse. The rescue operation revealed the sophisticated nature of the brothers' prison system when deputies discovered elaborate feeding schedules posted on chamber walls, documenting how the brothers maintained their victims' health just above starvation levels to ensure compliance while preventing death from malnutrition. Each chamber contained personal belongings from deceased victims, creating psychological torture chambers where survivors were forced to live, surrounded by reminders of women who had not survived the brothers' experiments. Dr. Hartwell's immediate medical assessments revealed evidence of systematic sexual assault, combined with pseudo-medical procedures that served no legitimate purpose beyond inflicting pain and psychological trauma on the captive women. His confidential medical reports, declassified decades later, documented injuries consistent with prolonged restraint, systematic beating, and sexual torture that demonstrated the brothers' complete dehumanization of their victims. The most horrifying discovery came when rescue teams located the burial site behind the cabin, where 4 victims who had died during captivity were interred in unmarked graves. Federal investigators' excavation revealed bodies showing signs of violent death from internal injuries, blunt force trauma, and systematic torture that exceeded even the survivors' accounts of the brothers' brutality. Anna Catherine Walsh's remains, identified through personal effects found in Morai's possession, showed evidence of the violent death that survivor testimony attributed to Morai's escalating brutality during his father's final months of illness. Medical examiner reports confirmed that her death resulted from internal injuries inflicted during one of the procedures that the brothers conducted under their father's supervision, providing crucial evidence for murder charges. The systematic documentation found throughout the property revealed the brothers' belief that they were conducting legitimate scientific research rather than committing systematic rape and torture. Cassius Grimwald's personal journals contained detailed observations about each victim's responses to various forms of abuse, recorded with clinical detachment that demonstrated complete psychological disconnection from their victim's humanity. Federal investigators discovered correspondence between the brothers discussing expansion plans that included the systematic kidnapping of entire families with particular focus on acquiring children who could be raised within their twisted research program from birth. These plans, found in Marai's workshop area, included architectural drawings for expanded prison facilities and detailed protocols for managing multiple generations of captive subjects. The brothers' complete lack of resistance during their arrest on February 20th demonstrated their genuine belief that their actions were justified by their father's scientific theories and their conviction that federal authorities would eventually recognize the importance of their research contributions. Court transcripts preserve their calm demeanor during initial questioning, expressing confusion about charges rather than remorse for their victims' suffering. Evidence collected during the 3-day crime scene investigation filled over 40 evidence boxes, including the brothers' detailed records of systematic abuse, their father's research methodology, and physical evidence from the modified prison chambers that would prove crucial during prosecution. Federal photographers documented every aspect of the crime scene, creating a visual record that would horrify jury members and ensure conviction. Survivor testimony collected during the rescue operation provided federal prosecutors with detailed accounts of the brothers' daily routines, their systematic approach to victim selection, and their discussions about future plans that revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. These first-hand accounts, corroborated by physical evidence and the brothers' own documentation, created an overwhelming case for prosecution. The transportation of 12 traumatized survivors to medical facilities in Little Rock required coordination between federal authorities, military medical personnel, and civilian physicians who volunteered their services to treat victims of crimes unprecedented. In Arkansas Territory history, their recovery would take months, but their courage in providing detailed testimony would prove essential for securing justice. As Cassius and Marai Grimwald were transported to federal custody in Little Rock on February 23, 1874, their calm acceptance of arrest and continued insistence that their actions served legitimate scientific purposes demonstrated the complete moral corruption that had enabled them to systematically torture and murder innocent women for over 18 months without experiencing any recognition of their victims' humanity or suffering. The trial of Cassius and Marai Grimwald opened on September 15, 1874, in the packed courtroom of Judge Marcus Harrington at the Federal District Court in Little Rock, Arkansas, with spectators traveling from across the territory to witness justice for crimes that had horrified even experienced frontier lawmen. Federal prosecutors presented over 300 pieces of physical evidence, including Jeremiah Grimwald's complete confession letter, the brothers' detailed journals documenting their systematic abuse, and testimony from all 12 survivors who had found the courage to relive their ordeal in pursuit of justice. Margaret Holloway's testimony on September 18th provided the most comprehensive account of the brothers' daily routines and their father's role in orchestrating the systematic torture that survivors endured for months in the reinforced attic chambers. Her educated background enabled her to recall specific dates, conversations, and details about the brothers' expansion plans that corroborated physical evidence and established the premeditated nature of their crimes beyond any reasonable doubt. Elizabeth Cromwell's testimony, delivered on September 20th despite her ongoing physical recovery from 8 months of captivity, revealed the full scope of Jeremiah Grimwald's pseudo-scientific research program and his son's complete belief that their systematic torture served legitimate medical purposes. Her account of witnessing Anna Catherine Walsh's death during one of Marai's violent procedures provided crucial testimony for the murder charges that would seal both brothers' fates. The defense attorney's attempts to portray the brothers as victims of their father's manipulation crumbled when prosecutors introduced Cassius and Marai's personal journals, written independently of their father's research and demonstrating their enthusiastic participation in selecting victims and planning expanded operations. These documents revealed the brothers' genuine excitement about their crimes and their detailed discussions about acquiring children for their future breeding experiments. Judge Harrington's management of survivor testimony demonstrated remarkable sensitivity for the period, ensuring that the women's accounts were heard in full while protecting them from unnecessary additional trauma during cross-examination. Court transcripts preserve his instructions to defense attorneys about respectful questioning of victims and his willingness to hold attorneys in contempt for any attempts to intimidate or blame the survivors for their ordeal. The prosecution's presentation of physical evidence consumed 3 full days of testimony, with federal investigators systematically documenting the modified prison chambers, restraint systems, and torture devices that Marai had constructed, with meticulous attention to prolonging suffering while preventing death. Dr. William Hartwell's medical testimony about the survivors' injuries provided graphic evidence of systematic torture that left several jury members visibly shaken. Jeremiah Grimwald's confession letter, read in its entirety to the packed courtroom on September 25th, provided the most damning evidence against his sons by detailing their enthusiastic participation in victim selection, their suggestions for improving torture techniques, and their independent planning for expanding the operation beyond their father's original scope. The letter's clinical tone and complete absence of remorse demonstrated the moral corruption that had infected the entire family. The brothers' own testimony, delivered against their attorney's advice, revealed their continued belief that their actions were justified by scientific necessity and their expectation that history would vindicate their contributions to medical knowledge. Cassius spoke for over 2 hours about the systematic methodology they had developed, displaying no recognition of their victims' humanity and expressing frustration that authorities had interrupted their important research work. Marai's testimony focused on the technical aspects of the prison construction and torture devices he had created, describing with obvious pride the sophisticated engineering solutions he had developed to maximize suffering while maintaining victim survival. His detailed explanations of restraint systems and soundproofing techniques provided additional evidence of premeditation while demonstrating his complete disconnection from the human cost of his innovations. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges, including kidnapping, systematic assault, and 4 counts of murder. Their speed, reflecting the overwhelming nature of evidence and the brothers' own testimony confirming their guilt. Judge Harrington's sentencing on October 1st emphasized both the unprecedented nature of their crimes and the necessity of capital punishment to protect future potential victims from similar systematic predation. Both brothers were sentenced to death by hanging, with execution scheduled for November 15, 1874. Their final weeks in federal custody were documented by the prison chaplain, who reported the brothers' continued discussions about their research, methodology, and their expectations of posthumous scientific recognition. The execution of Cassius and Marai Grimwald on November 15, 1874, was witnessed by over 200 spectators, including several survivors who had requested permission to watch justice being served. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe the brothers' final words as continued assertions of their scientific contributions and their belief that future generations would understand the importance of their research into human breeding optimization. The 12 survivors received financial compensation totaling over $3,000 from the sale of the Grimwald property, with the proceeds administered by federal authorities to ensure ongoing medical care and support. Margaret Holloway used her portion to establish a school for frontier children, while Elizabeth Cromwell married and moved west, maintaining correspondence with other survivors for decades. Deputy Marshal Theodore Blackwood received promotion to United States Marshal for Arkansas Territory in recognition of his systematic investigation. The Grimwald property was burned to the ground by federal authorities, and the land donated to Newton County as a memorial park bearing the names of all 16 victims, a permanent testimony to their courage and the community's commitment to protecting future generations from similar evil.